So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for being for allowing me to be part of your day. I know what you're doing. I have kids and grandkids, and myself, I know what we do. We chase them around, going from athletic event to academic events. So it's tough to be a parent, put it that way. So I appreciate the fact that you've tuned in today. It means a lot to me. So if you like what you hear, share it with others, pass it on to your family. We're building an audience, not necessarily for Dr. Bob, but for the people that I bring on the show. And today, it's a great pleasure to welcome in studio Nick Halaris. Nick, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Dr. Bob. Excited to be here.
So who is Nick Halaris? Well, Nick, he's a Midwestern guy. He went to the University of Michigan, and then he came out to California, ended up going to law school at Stanford. Congratulations. I understand it's kind of tough to get into Stanford.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I think it's gotten harder, though, actually, to be fair, in the last 20 years since I've been there, but yeah.
So anyway, feather in your cap, my friend. And after law school, he has got into a whole totally different niche, not necessarily law, but he's doing a lot of real estate development here in Los Angeles, in Southern California area. He's got a couple kids, and he also has a new newsletter. We're going to talk about the newsletter. So, Nick, you got a lot going on.
Yeah, trying to keep busy. You know, it's these days I feel like it's not just the Gen Z and the millennials who have sort of multiple careers. It's all of us.
Yeah.
Many ways to add value to society.
That's for sure, and that's a good way to put it. So listen, I like to start with my guests telling a little bit about themselves, where your background, where you grew up, your family. What were the things that kind of caused you to be doing what you're doing today? Because certainly there's a backdrop to this. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and you're up.
Yeah, appreciate that, and I'll try not to talk for too long because it could go on for this entire episode, but. I was born and raised in the Detroit area. My mom was a native Detroit. My father was an immigrant from Greece who kind of grew up in that post-World War II era where America was looked at as like the place to be.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he arrived to Detroit in February of, I think it was 1967 or 68, right after the riots had happened.
Oh my gosh.
And so the view that he had gotten from, growing up in that post-war era to the reality on the ground in the late 1960s was completely different. I'm sure that was a shock to him, but had a great upbringing. I was fortunate to have a very stable family. I have an older brother and my parents were great, and ended up going to school at Michigan where I studied economics, and then went to law school at Stanford. Never wanted to become a lawyer. I did some internships and I realized right away that life wasn't for me.
Wow.
I kind of looked at the partners who were at that time, kind of in their 50s, and they didn't look very happy, and they were working 7 days a week. They're making great money and whatnot, but I wasn't just intellectually stimulated enough by it to make that kind of sacrifice. So I looked for other things to do. I did strategy consulting for about 4 years.
Okay.
And then the world blew up. This is like 2007, 8, 9. That's when I was doing the strategy consulting. And for my whole life, as long as I can remember, I was interested in investing and had studied kind of the lives of some of the famous investors out there, like the Warren Buffetts of the world. And I was like, yeah, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, it's going to be in that field, in investing. And I thought about doing something with public securities, but at that moment, what had just blown up was real estate. We had the housing bubble and it was crashed. So I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I should just jump into that. And so I had some friends of mine who were doing it, partnered up with them. Bought one house in Compton, like $130,000 house in Compton in 2010. And then 2 or 3 years later, had this massive business. We've done over 150 houses.
Wow.
Bought 3,000 units of apartments. And the rest is kind of history from there.
Wow. So your Compton home, did you sell it?
Yes, sold it.
Did you make a profit on that home?
Made a great profit, but probably should have kept it because we bought it for $130,000 essentially from foreclosure.
Yeah.
It is a house that had been taken back by the bank, and we maybe spent like $30,000 on it and then sold it into the mid 200s. So made a huge return, but those houses now are like $600,000-700,000. So Probably could have made a business case for keeping it, but
So that's the problem in Southern California. I've bought in condos and homes in Los Angeles, and you, you saw them and you kind of go, oh my gosh, 10 years, 15 years later, you
Yep.
look back and you kind of go, I wish I wouldn't have ever sold that property. But I think that's the nature of Southern California in general, right? At least it has been for the last 30, 40 years that I can remember.
it
That's
is.
for darn sure.
And it's also an interesting sort of data point. One of the key drivers, in my opinion, of sort of the problem that we're seeing in this country, where there's haves and have-nots, because of a whole bunch of reasons, policy reasons, starting all the way at the Federal Reserve and going down to local government.
Yeah.
Housing has become sort of unfairly restricted. The production of new housing has become unfairly restricted. And so society has started to skew on the basis of whether or not you got into the homeownership world or not.
Yeah.
And if you did, you made great returns. And in many cases, like I forget the exact statistic, but almost all of America's wealth is in houses. If you look outside of the top, 1%, let's say, who own stocks and other things. But if you look past the top 1%, it's basically houses.
Yeah.
And so America has skewed on, do you own a house or not?
Yeah.
And that's the main determiner, which is not a great thing for, the society, for democracy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly I'm my observation, and I live in this world because I have patients of mine who I'm in Santa Monica, as you know, and it's almost impossible for people, young people I'm talking about, who are even dual income, lawyers and doctors and other people, to really purchase a home in Santa Monica. You need help from family, or you need other, trust fund money, or who knows. Because the homes have become so expensive, and so young people, and those are the people who really are buying homes, who want to buy homes. Older folks are not so interested in putting getting into a 30-year mortgage, put it that way. And so I think that I see the loss. A lot of people, and it's sad because they're having to go to the hinterlands, they're having to move out of state even. But I'm curious. Okay, so I obviously currently right now we have interest rates have gone up. A couple of years ago they were in the 2s, and that was like a sweet time to get into a home. And some of you who are listening today are fortunate people. You bought a home and you are paying a 2.5%, 3% interest rate, which is, God bless you. I'm happy for you, but it's not happening today. Tell us, and you're in the business. Tell us from your perspective. Let me give you a scenario. Young family has one kid, two kids second kid's on the way. They are renting an apartment right now in Los Angeles. They would love to have a house or possibly a condo, but a little bit of space, more space that they can raise their children in. How do they do that?
Yeah, that is a big and important question for a young family if they want to stay in this region. And one of the things I've been writing about over and over again in my newsletter, which is called Profit Plus, by the way, which is
good.
Yeah, the idea behind Profit Plus is I'm trying to help people learn how to build wealth, but not at the expense of everything else in their life.
Yeah,
it's about doing it in the right sort of way. But the most consistent piece of advice that I've been writing about for the last 5 years in that newsletter is there's really only one way to make it in this country now, and that's to own assets. And the home is sort of the primary asset that you need to get.
Yeah.
For many reasons, not just because it makes financial sense, but it's also an important way to establish roots in the community. And if you happen to have kids, it's also super useful to have a home rather than be subject to a small space or whatever, or rental property where you're kind of, you have more risk when you're in a rental property because you don't control the situation. So I highly recommend people try to get into the home ownership lane because it's the clearest path to financial success in America. And I don't think that, even with all the talk about the reforms, as a result of the election, I don't think they're going to fix housing. And so the likelihood that housing just becomes more and more expensive, I think is high. And unless we get like AI robots that can build houses for nothing, which maybe we'll get that. But until that happens, I'm bullish on house prices. And so I recommend people buy, even in a crazy time like this, where right now, because mortgage rates, because of the COVID run up, right? Houses went up like 40, 50% in a short period of time. and then mortgage rates went up 100% or more, it's really expensive to buy property everywhere. It's not just in Southern California, but I'm actually recommending that people, if they can figure it out financially, to do it now, because I suspect that the moment that financial conditions ease, like if we get rates even like at 5, I think that demand that we saw during the COVID era, where there was 70, 80 bids on houses, I think that's coming back.
Yeah.
And so even though right now you might lock yourself into a mortgage where you're paying more than you want to pay, you'll be better off than chasing a deal and overpaying on a house by 100 or 200,000 in Santa Monica, for example, in 18 months time. So I'm pushing for people to really try to figure it out.
To figure it out. And how do they figure it out? I mean, is it a matter of, calling your relatives or obviously making more money? But because I see it as a lot of people are trying to figure it out, and they feel overwhelmed and frankly depressed by this whole thing. And definitely when you're out there and you're bidding, and a bidding war, there's nothing more stressful in my mind than a bidding war. If you have and these people are walking in, as you well know, with cash on the barrel, and kind of hard to, these sellers kind of look at cash and say, that's cash. I'm not worrying about these guys getting a loan and all the nuances of that. How does that happen? I mean, is it a pipe dream that, we should say to people, don't even worry about it anymore, just rent and be happy? You're saying no, of course, but can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, it's tough. America is a fundamentally unfair place, and the way that manifests in housing is that people get help from their relatives.
Let me stop. Hold on.
Yeah.
You say it's fundamentally unfair? I mean, what do you mean by? Because I've always looked at America as being a land of opportunity. Certainly, I hate to think of the country as being fundamentally unfair. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like my view on America is I love America. I think it's the greatest country that's ever existed. And I think it's crucial for the preservation of freedom, human freedom. America basically has to survive or it's over. So I'm a bull on this country. I love it. But I do believe it is an unfair place. And it's unfair in the sense that we champion ideas like meritocracy, but our systems are set up to where the elites just keep getting more and more elite because of the way opportunity kind of spreads around. And it manifests in many areas. Housing is one area, but education is another one. Yeah. I happen to be lucky. I had gotten into these good schools and got myself into this education pipeline, which is still the best pipeline from going from zero to wealth that has ever existed in human history. Yeah. So it's an amazing pipeline, but there's so few spots. It's like...
So let me ask you a question. Were you a D student in high school?
No.
Were you a C student in high school?
No.
Were you a B student in high school?
No.
Were you an A student in high school?
I was like valedictorian. Yeah.
Okay.
Top of the class.
So there is a little bit of merit there. I hate to say it, but you did earn a little bit of, you earned your entrance into University of Michigan. Were you a lousy student at University of Michigan? Were you drinking all night?
I was focused.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a little, Nick, okay, you're right that there are certain blue bloods that, get their way paved. But there is certainly, were you a middle class family, or what kind of, your dad was an immigrant?
Yeah.
I presume that he was probably, like most immigrants, they have to start from ground zero and kind of build their, it sounds like you had a great family, a stable family, which is a blessing, by the way.
Yeah.
And you were fortunate. But you probably earned your way into Stanford Law School. I don't think you get in on the lark.
Agreed. Like, there is that sense in which the American system works. Like, if you happen to be smart, it's a little unfair in the sense that you have to be smart in a certain kind of way. So basically, to get into Stanford, you have to get good grades, and you have to be good at tests, and you have to be good at standardized tests. And so not everybody's mind is built that way. Mine was absolutely teed up for that, and I was diligent on top of it. So I kind of did both. But if you happen to have some other kind of intelligence, you're not going to make it through that track and get in there.
So not to belabor this point, but I think that certainly there are things which you can call them unfair or not fair. I don't like the word fundamentally unfair. That kind of strikes me. But let me just ask another couple of questions. Did you play basketball at University of Michigan?
No,
You were not on the team.
Nope.
Why not?
I wasn't good enough.
Okay. So, and the people who were on that team were people like who? Who were they? They were.
Yeah, I don't even remember.
Did they
who
go
was
on to the? Someone probably went on to the pros.
Yeah, someone. I forget my era. Like I was after. Remember the Fab Five?
Yeah, sure.
I was after those guys. So
Okay.
It had lost its luster because they were basically doing illegal stuff, paying those kids, and so the team went through some sanctions, and I think the sanctions were like right when I was there.
So I'm clearly not
Yeah.
into illegal stuff, but
Yeah.
obviously the guys who were playing basketball were talented in their own different way. They may not have been talented. So I think that I look at it as this. I look at it as being there are opportunities in America which are amazing. People have different giftings, and your gifting was clearly obviously you were a part of a Fab One. You were
Yeah.
you were on your way to success, being able to go to Stanford Law School for sure. But anyway, I do think that there are opportunities, and that's for that. I just want to clarify that.
Look, it's a fair point. I don't disagree with it. I think the fundamental unfairness that I see manifests in ways that it's kind of hard to actually see. So I'll give you just one example, and we can close the loop on this stuff. So when I went to Stanford Law School, some of my classmates had spent their whole lives in the elite private school
World
sort of track.
Yeah.
And the difference between me and them had nothing to do with smarts, but they had materially better access to people that had influential positions. And so some of them had outright wealth too. There's some people who inherited great wealth at a young age, or their families had great wealth. But the real advantage in my view is for people who come from that track is that all of their friends were doing interesting things. So everyone they knew was going to an Ivy League. So that is an interesting advantage. And then moreover, their parents were doing interesting things, running companies, starting companies, doctors, creative people. And so it's hard to quantify what kind of advantage it gives you, but it absolutely gives you an advantage.
No question about it. When I got to UCLA Medical School, look, I was from a small town in Northern California. I did feel like I was the last of the last in that class, and there were a lot of super smart people. You're completely right. You run into things and you kind of go, wow. Even like silly things, like there were people who traveled the world, like really traveled the world. I mean, I didn't travel the world. I went to Hawaii one time, and that was my traveling of the world. So you're right. And you kind of when you show up at these, in professional schools, you begin to look around, and kind of go, oh, I got these people, on the spring vacation, they're not going home and painting a house is to make a couple extra bucks. They're flying to Switzerland to ski. Okay, and you kind of go, oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I look at that as being fundamentally unfair, but I certainly saw things I had never seen before in Eureka, California. I can promise you that. Anyway, okay, so I want going back to your newsletter. Yeah. Your newsletter, the name of again is Profit
Plus.
Profit Plus. What do you talk about in your newsletter?
Yeah, so the overarching premise is an ongoing meditation about what it takes to build wealth in this modern world without sort of losing your integrity.
Yeah.
That's how I phrase it. And that's kind of a vague statement, but I got really interested in it because just paying attention and being involved in real estate, which is kind of a scrappy business, you meet a lot of interesting characters. Like our society, there's a lot of people who are kind of flirting with the gray lines, and it's easy to flirt with the gray lines, and people often cross those lines, and there's all these, all you got to do is like open the newspaper. There's another case of
somebody getting caught.
Yeah, securities fraud or whatever's going on. And so I really think from a sort of moral and philosophical and spiritual standpoint, like you can't go about this economic part of your life in a silo, because it's just too dangerous. Like money, the allure of money, which is what our culture is unfortunately like hyper focused on. And I understand that. it is so powerful that it could get you to do all kinds of things that you don't really want to do. Like at the end of the day, if you sacrifice everything you believe in and got rich, you'd end up in a way worse spot than just being poor your whole life, but never sacrificing what you
Yep.
care about.
Yep.
And so I'm talking about all kinds of things and trying to get people to think about their life in a holistic sense. So to consider the moral side of life, consider the spiritual side of life, consider the civic side. So I
Yeah.
write a lot of articles about the civic responsibility of Americans. Americans, unfortunately, they come out to vote every few years and they're passionate about voting, but they don't do much else en masse. And that's part of the reason why we have so many problems. Um, and then I also recognize, though, that in our world, you have to win financially. If
Yeah.
you don't win financially, life is going to be worse for you. And so I'm trying to help people find ways to do that. So I write a lot about investing and entrepreneurship and the ways to try to get into that stream because that's kind of the only way to do it.
Yeah. I think also right now, Americans are piling up a lot of personal debt. Can you speak to that? Because I happen to be a very debt adverse person historically, and I have at times in my life. You referred to 2008, 2009. Okay, that was the time of I was stressed for sure, and I ran into some credit card debt. It was big for me. It wasn't, I eventually broke it, but fought it off and beat that down. But I'm debt adverse, and I see how that can really uh, it can really bring a person down. So your thoughts about debt?
Yeah, it's a great point. And debt is incredibly dangerous as a financial instrument. It's also incredibly useful as a real estate investor. Like actually managing debt is sort of how you create alpha, to use the investing lingo, is you leverage assets in intelligent ways.
Yep.
There's unintelligent ways to do it or risky ways to do it. But yeah, our culture, one of the byproducts of our sort of money obsessed culture and our materialistic consumption obsessed culture is that Wall Street has responded basically in the course of your career. Let's say Wall Street sort of looked out and saw this potential, and then they just kept creating more and more products to make it easier and easier
Yep.
for Americans to take on debt. And so there's a lot of really horrible types of consumer debt that I advise people to stay away from at all costs. Like I don't even like these auto loans unless they're at like 0%, which in not now, but in recent times you could get 0% car loans. Those are decent. But
yeah,
those are
I would say
yeah, those are okay. But
yeah,
man, credit cards are terrible because the rates are so punitive, and it's also just sort of credit cards are kind of like social media in the sense that they were designed to take advantage of a problem, like a default problem with the human mind, which is that it prefers sort of immediate gratification over delayed.
sure.
And so people just spend money that they shouldn't spend. And then once you get into a debt spiral, it's very difficult to get out. So,
Yeah, no, I know people who were paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars on their charge cards, their bill, and of those hundreds of dollars, the majority of that is actually just paying down the interest on that card. You're barely touching the actual principal. That is pretty depressing, and that is something that people get into, and it's easy to get into that. Obviously, you need to buy food, or you need to buy, say your car breaks down, you need to get it fixed. Those are times when you have no recourse, essentially, if you don't have anything in the bank. It is hard. And so when you get into 18-20% credit card interest rates, those are big numbers.
Yeah.
Those are big numbers.
Yeah, totally.
So you've said a couple of things, and I want to kind of dig into this a little bit more. You're talking about the spirituality, the morality of acquiring wealth, and how wealth is valuable. There's no question that when you have assets, you can do things that you cannot do if you don't have assets. I've certainly have been on that other side of the coin myself. But tell me about the spirituality and that whole moral aspect of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Let me try to think of how I can best answer this. I feel like there's sort of the practical side of building wealth, which a lot of people talk about.
Yeah.
That if you kind of went to like the top podcasts, for example, like in our world, or the top newsletters, everyone is like laser focused on the tactics of building wealth. And I get it. It's what sells, right? Let me help you get rich.
Yeah.
But in my view, just from all of the sort of self work that I've done, all the writing I've done for myself and all the books I've read and all the meditation I've done, I sort of feel like there is a right way of going about building wealth. And it's not available for everyone. In that sense, you know, the world is a little bit unfair because maybe not fundamentally unfair, but a little bit unfair.
Okay. I'll take that.
Yeah. Because I think it goes back to this idea of a calling.
Yeah.
Or to put it in religious terms, like figuring out what the will of God is, you know, as it relates to your life,
Yeah.
what your mission is. And I do think it's possible. It's definitely possible in modern life to figure out what your calling is and turn it into a wealth production enterprise.
Yeah.
That's what's so exciting actually about modern society, is that this is definitely the best time ever for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can do podcasts, you can be a doctor. There's just so many ways that you can orient your daily activity to help other people essentially fulfill some kind of mission that goes beyond the tactics of how do I get more money into my bank account?
Yeah.
And satisfy whatever moral and spiritual need is driving you from the inside.
Yep.
And so I it's hard to sort of teach that in a newsletter, but I write a lot about it and try to inspire people to think about the idea of building wealth in those terms rather than in the terms of like, you know, when I was coming up, it was the early tech days and the tech bubble had just come up, and the ethos at the time was influenced by the ethos of the 90s, which was like a very Wall Street driven ethos, which is like, we just need to get rich as fast as possible.
Yeah.
That was all the young people. And I felt that. And I went forward in my life largely driven by that desire. That's why I started investing and started being an entrepreneur in the first place. And that's dangerous, because without a moral center or without understanding like, hey, wait a minute, how do I really want to show up in this world? What kind of value do I really want to add? Who are the people that I care about helping, and why do I care about helping them?
Yeah.
If you don't start to answer those questions, then you go down this path where you may get rich, but you'll look back and you'll feel some kind of profound regret because it wasn't what you were supposed to do. And so that's the general theme.
You know,
of it.
it's interesting you say this, because I certainly deal with a lot of families in my practice in my community, west side of LA, that are extremely wealthy. And my observation, and this is because you deal with people who have resources, is it certainly doesn't buy happiness. It doesn't. It buys sometimes calamity and chaos. And I do find that the people, first of all, I think the generosity is a good place to begin. I find that the people who are both generous with their resources, but also generous of heart, they're willing to stop and say, hold on, what's going on with you? How are you doing? That generosity of being, it makes people super duper fulfilled people, because they're doing something that is of great value. I like the word calling. I do think that calling is something, if you have that sense of purpose, you're willing to do things. And I'll just share one personal thing of mine. I as a doctor, I do medical mission trips, and I think you know that.
Yep.
And we just got back from Liberia a couple of weeks ago. And I do feel that is my calling. I feel like this, God gave me an ability to go to a different country and literally open my little black bag, and I can actually have kids come to me, and I can take care of them and help them. Some of these kids, one kid I'm thinking about in particular, he had a hernia. Okay, a hernia is an easy diagnosis. It's not complicated to make. It's pretty obvious. The kid has this bulge in his lower abdomen. And I told the mother, listen, your son has got a hernia. And she goes, and she didn't quite understand that. But anyway, but she goes, okay. And I said, he needs an operation. And she goes, oh my gosh. This is a poor family. And I told, we were working in a church, and I told the pastor, I said, listen, you need to take this kid to the hospital, which happened to be John Fitzgerald Kennedy Hospital in Monrovia, Liberia. That's the main hospital. And so to JFK, I said, take the kid to JFK, price up what it costs to get a herniorrhaphy, which is the name of the operation that fixes hernias. And so they did. You know how much it cost? $300.
Wow.
I go, that's the deal.
Let's do it. Yeah, do it right now.
That's the deal.
Yeah.
And so this kid who came in, and by the way, if you have a hernia when you're a kid, that hernia is going to be there for all of your life. You're going to be walking around, shoving in your intestines and back into your tummy. It's not a way to live your life. It's a lousy way to live your life. And so I said, let's fix this kid. I can't tell you, Nick, how happy that makes me that I was able to go there. And if it was that kid alone, if that was the only reason I went to Liberia, was to take care of this kid, that brings great joy to my heart. It really does. So, and I'm sure that you have had that same kind of feeling, guiding and directing people with your newsletter. Do you get people responding to your newsletter and saying thank you?
I do, actually, and it's really like humbling, and it does feel good. It's like one of the best feelings that you can have as a human being. It's interesting that you tell the story about the missions, because one of the things that I've been struggling with as a writer or a podcaster is that there's a lack of directness in terms of the human intervention. Like, I think there's a part of me that is interested to do something more like you do, which is like directly help an individual who's in need like that. And I'm sure that must be incredible. How long have you been doing the missions, and how many have you done?
I've been doing it for 25 years, but we've done over 50 missions to all over the world. I've been, we just in Liberia, but I've been to Africa 26 times.
Wow.
So I've been to many, many countries in Africa: Sierra Leone, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia many times, Tanzania, Burundi, Benin. So these are odd countries that people don't usually go to, but I've been there many times, and it is wonderful to actually, be able to, you have to realize when I'm there, I'm intimately involved with these people. I'm 2 feet from these mothers who bring these kids in, and we have conversations about what's going on with them, with their health, and how I can help them. So my interaction is really quite, I'm there. I'm not driving around Monrovia, Liberia from a double-decker air-conditioned bus. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll write down. I can smell their bad breath, if you will. Okay, but anyway, it's a very intense interaction, but it is tremendously fulfilling.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, and I might actually come on one of these missions with you, because I'm super interested.
Okay, well, you're doing this in a public forum right
I
now.
know.
There are people watching you. There are people hearing you. So I will put you down. Love to have you, honestly, Nick.
Yeah, it's something that's been on my mind, actually. When I was kind of like going through my own soul searching process, maybe a decade ago now, kind of right when my first son was being born.
Yeah,
I got really into, reading about people like Gandhi or even Walt Whitman. And
Sure.
what I found interesting about both of those individuals is they routinely put themselves in that position. So Whitman would go to the Civil War hospitals and volunteer.
Wow.
And Gandhi would often serve as a nurse to reorient himself to this idea around the purpose of life is selfless service. So he was trying to basically live that philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's hard if you are, he was engaged in great political work, and he was writing a lot of stuff and giving a lot of speeches, but he had to go back to helping individuals at a direct level.
Yep.
Just to like remind himself of what the truth is about
I think when you're out there, in the mix, you're out there with people. There's no question that first of all, you get a sense of appreciation for your health. And also, I come back always from these trips, and I thank God for America, because I too am a serious patriot and love this country. Not everything we do is perfect, of course, and we have a history of some things that have been, which we need to continue to correct. But I do come back with a grateful heart, and but I do think that you get a different perspective. I always joke that I tend to go on these trips. I take a couple of trips a year. One of them is in the spring of the year, and one of the things I say is that I really come back to America, and the problem is I can't complain because I realize what a blessing we have in this country, and it's to the point that I can't even complain about April 15th. I can't complain about paying taxes, which I used to love to complain about paying taxes, but now I can't complain about that anymore because I can't complain about anything. But anyway, all that to say is that it does give you a different perspective, and I think a very good perspective about life.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine.
Yeah.
I feel like America, for all its faults, it really represents something incredible. And if you just looked at the people alive today, that's one thing. But if you just imagine for a second, like take a bigger step back and think of all the people that have ever lived, no one's had it as good as us. And so we're in like the top 0.0000001% of life opportunity sets ever given.
Yep.
And it's crazy to think about that, and go about life complaining.
It's funny, interesting, Nick. I think about every time I get into an airplane, I go, I'm going to be in New York City in 4.5 hours from LA. I go, that is amazing. I mean, I can't quite get, and they're sitting there, they're serving me food. I'm listening to, a symphony as I'm flying across the country. I do think about these things. It really, and it does fill me with awe and great gratitude. But you're absolutely right. Even the kings of England or whatever, those were cold, dark, dank, castles that they were living in, and also they were also under complete, constant threat of someone's going to break down the door and get across the moat and get them. So even the royalty in those days didn't live like we live. We live really, really, really well.
Great.
And I think that is, it causes me to be thankful, number one, but also causes me to want to help people and I'll see them elevated as well in terms of how they live their life.
Absolutely.
So going back to, so you've been doing real estate, making buildings, you build apartments, and what do you renovate, or do you, what exactly, is it mainly homes, or what is your emphasis?
So the strategy has changed over the years. Done everything from flip houses, buying these foreclosures after the aftermath of the crash.
Yep.
To buying large apartment complexes in Atlanta. So bought like 3,000 units worth of buildings that range from and renovating them, and then either keeping them. So some of those we've kept and some of those we've sold.
Yep.
And then in recent times, sort of in the pre-COVID era, we were focused on building a portfolio of really nice infill Los Angeles, West Hollywood properties and projects. And so building ground up apartment buildings, buying apartment buildings. And then we always sort of dabble in houses. So we've done a bunch of deals in the Hollywood Hills, for example.
Yeah.
Those are deals where it's essentially a house flip, but because of the sort of nature of the market, they have great financial return profile.
Yeah.
Because buyers, it's just
they want to be there.
It's one of the best.
They want to be. Yeah, it's the best place in the world.
One of the best in the world. Yeah. So
the views are amazing and everything else. Amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm watching our time here, and we're coming to the end of our time. But your parting shots in terms of encouraging the people who are listening today in terms of building wealth. You're saying that wealth is important, and I think certainly when you start having children, you begin to realize that you want to pass on a legacy to your children, and in terms of just living, also being able to potentially retire, it's kind of nice to be able to have those resources in your pocket, so you can actually consider that you're not be working all of your life necessarily, but any parting pieces of advice that you can leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway from writing about this and thinking about this over the last 5 years is that we thankfully here in America and in many parts of the world, we live in a place and an era where there's this unique historical opportunity to go about the age-old human endeavor of getting rich. Let's call it what it is, right? People want to
Yep.
get rich,
Sure.
but to do it in a way that is authentic to you and to do it in a way that doesn't require you to compromise your integrity. So if you're a pacifist and don't believe in war, don't go work for Northrop Grumman. You know, you have that
Yes,
choice, right?
that's right.
And that's just like a kind of a jokey example, but there's more serious ones because there are many our businesses are, you know, not always looking out for the best interests of people, and so that's a way I see people compromise their integrity often, which is to work at companies where they know the products are bad for people, but they're still working for it, but they're getting rich along the way.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to think very carefully about that kind of stuff as well, and to go for it. And I really feel like for all of the great things about our education system, it's sort of pushing kids and young people down just one path. And that's
Yeah.
the path of like, hey, get just the path I went on, which is keep getting good grades. Someone's going to give you an opportunity. Someone's going to give you a job. They're going to pay you a salary. They're going to give you a bonus. But the truth about America, if you really step back and you study how people make it in this country, putting aside people like athletes and artists who can make enormous sums of money from just doing what they do, people make money from starting their own businesses or
Yeah.
working for other people who start businesses. And so, I mean, I encourage people to, even if they don't want to start their own company, go work for someone who at early stage who started their company. Entrepreneurship is basically the only way
Yeah.
in this world, unless you happen to be highly skilled, like a doctor or a professional athlete or something like that.
Yeah.
Then there's another way. But entrepreneurship is the path, but you got to do it in the right way. That's the parting shot.
So I mean, even I will tell you that, you know, I'm a big believer in entrepreneurship. And you can be an entrepreneur in the medical world too. I mean, as a doctor, I have my own practice, and so I had to step out and start my practice. It wasn't like it was there before, and that has proven to be a wonderful thing for me. It's given me a lot of freedom, certainly time. I'm my own boss, and so there are many times I'm thinking about firing myself. Because I'm a lousy employee sometimes.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm still working, and I'm happy to work. But it does give you the entrepreneurship. I completely agree that when you start your own shop, you kind of switch into a different gear. You end up becoming a little more responsible, a little more aware. You also understand the dynamics of money, of cash flow. And those are good things to know about. You know, if you don't know about that kind of stuff, it's kind of hard to, comprehend why, why bosses and people who own businesses do what they do, because you're not dealing with cash flow. Cash flow is kind of king, right, when you're running a business. And so I do think that does give you a little bit of a foot up, put it that way. So I completely agree with you, and I tell my kids to do this, and some of them have agreed, some of them haven't agreed, but, you know, people are different too. Some people are more driven to begin a business. So I love entrepreneurship. So amen to that.
Yeah.
I believe in it. And you're doing fine. You started it, and you're not looking back, right? You're happy?
No, not looking back. I'm super excited about sort of the next evolution, which I'm going to keep the business going, but I like the content work. Like, I really like writing the newsletter. I've established like a nice audience. There's like 20,000 people from around the world reading the newsletter.
That's huge.
Which is so humbling. Yeah. And people are emailing me in response, and it's been great. And I want to keep putting stuff out there. And then I have a podcast as well, called the Nick Halaris Show, which is a related project in the sense that what I'm doing on the show is I'm examining big issues, and I actually have a couple of big issues I want to examine with you if we have a few minutes. Through the lens, though, of people who are actually trying to do something positive about it.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's take, for example, like I covered a lot of the election.
Yeah.
And a lot of the issues in the election. Covered immigration, covered election reform, covered gun violence and the answers to gun violence. But only by talking to people who are pushing for something good. Not people complaining, or not people doing some kind of polarized demon seeking of the other side. It's like, okay, Here's a gun advocate who has a specific set of policies, and here's why she believes in those.
Yep.
And what do we think about that? Having an honest conversation about it. And that's been really rewarding, because what it's revealed to me, I think I've done like 70 episodes now.
Wow.
And I've had talked to politicians and civic activists and civic leaders and socially conscious entrepreneurs. What it's revealed to me is actually underneath all the noise and all the BS, frankly, of the American political dialogue is an army of people who are actually trying to make this country better and make the world better. So they're entrepreneurs pursuing incredibly bold visions for socially conscious enterprises. They're civic activists who are pushing for like practical reforms for gun violence and mental health issues and homelessness.
Yep.
And the tragedy is that the mainstream media doesn't cover this movement. And so I'm trying to grow the audience of that podcast, just to like, there's got to be another story, another voice that tells the truth, which is like, hey, look at all these people. Look at what they're doing. Yeah.
No, those are the people that I interview on this podcast all the time. There's so many good things that are going on, which are amazing. People who are involved in music and art and sports and all sorts of things. And you're exactly right. They're trying to make this world a better place. And even people who may be on the other side of the aisle, who have a different letter behind their name, they're not all demons. People kind of make them out to be that way, and they like to get these sound bites which make them look bad. But they're not all bad. They're not all bad people. That's for darn sure. And I know that because I take care of their kids in my office. I see them. We have conversations. Yeah. And many of those people, they're not demonic in the way they're looking at the world. They're not trying to hurt people. They're trying to help people, maybe a little different version of helping people, but that's what a lot of these people are motivated by. Nick, I'm looking at your time. We are running out of time here, and I wanted, first of all, thank you for making the time to be here, to come on the Hamilton Review. You've been a very interesting conversation, I have to say. It's been great.
I really enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So, how do people find you? First of all, how do people find your podcast? Your podcast, number one, your newsletter, number two.
Yeah, you can find it all at nickhalaris.com. All my social handles are at Nick Halaris. And so
how do you spell Nick and how do you spell Halaris?
Yeah, NickHalaris.
Okay.
Yep.
Just very phonetic. That's what I would have said.
Yeah, and you can sign up for the newsletter for free, and the podcast is there. You can check out past episodes and the future stuff we got coming.
And your newsletter, again, is entitled?
Profit Plus.
Profit Plus. Yep. And is that, if I Google Profit Plus, will I find it?
Yeah. If you Google Nick Halaris or Profit Plus, it'll all come up.
It'll pop up.
Yeah.
Okay. So friends, check it out. Nick Halaris, he's got a podcast. He's got a newsletter. 20,000 people is a lot of people. You're touching a lot of lives with that newsletter. It's amazing. Good for you.
Thank you very much.
And friends, thank you guys for tuning in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you, Nick Halaris, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.